Hi everyone, welcome back to Pocket Perspectives podcast. This is actually part 2 of my episode with Steve, where we talk all about the psychology of debt and money and emotions and mental health and how it all kind of plays into each other. It is an absolutely amazing episode, so good that we had to split it into two. This is part 2, so if you wondering why it's kind of such an abrupt start, definitely go back to last week's video and check out part 1 before you watch this. But I really hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did, and I will see you next week. Bye guys.
Just moving on to the next segment then, I want to talk on like kind of emotions. I think that's such an important factor to deal with just in general life, but obviously when it comes to money, there's so many different emotions at play. So I was doing a little bit of research and I found the emotional cycle of debt, and essentially like the clues in the name, it's just a cycle that a lot of us go through with many things in our life, but including our finances. So it can start from denial and kind of ignoring it, again, like I spoke about before, having our head in the sand. Then it can go over to like stress, anxiety. Then if this debt's building up, you can go into like guilt, shame, anger. And then in an ideal world, hopefully that kind of comes full circle and you kind of have to accept it and then kind of make strategies and how to improve and etc. etc. So I wanted to get kind of your take on kind of how you think emotions play into debt and kind of what your take on that is.
Yeah, so again, it's a bigger human thing than just debt. So
Yeah.
the emotional cycle of debt is actually built off something called the Kubler-Ross change curve. It
Mm-hmm.
also went by the name of the Kubler-Ross grief curve, and eventually just the transition curve.
Yeah.
So I came across it as a business tool when I worked in transformation programs, and it was about, we'd go into the office and we'd do some stuff, and then we say, right, this is the change we're going to make, and
Yeah.
people would go through this exact same cycle because of the changes that we were making in the office. And these are the same emotions that play out if you lose somebody that's close to you, or,
Yeah.
or a family pet. These are the same things that play out when any change is brought into somebody's life. Obviously, there are levels of change, right? But these are normal human reactions to things.
Yeah.
And for me, the trick is kind of, it's not about denying yourself the ability to feel these feelings. It's about realizing that they are there
Mm-hmm.
and then processing them as quickly as you can and moving on to the next stage.
Yeah.
Because until with debt especially, debt doesn't resolve itself. It requires intervention from the person in debt. Like I said, go back to the beginning where I said, think about them as part of the supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, likewise, we wouldn't work with suppliers who didn't engage with us. And what tends to happen, I spoke about this once in terms of, if I let my mate down the pub 50 quid and he said, right, Steve, Friday, I'll pay that back. No worries, mate, no worries. And then Friday comes and he doesn't turn up and he hasn't called me. And I try and call him and he clicks it off to voicemail. And then I find out he's drinking in a pub down the road. I'm going to think he's mugging me off a bit, right?
Yeah.
And if I just don't know, I'm probably going to end up at that same mindset. I might not be on week 1, it might not be on week 2, but by week 3 or 4, I'm thinking, hang about, he's taking Michael now, because he hasn't bothered. But if he came up to me and said, "Do you know what, Steve? Fridge just bust. I've got to sort that out. Obviously he's got a family, and so I can pay you, but it won't be until this time next month."
Yeah.
Then I go away and go, yeah, all right, fair play, mate. It's not ideal, and I think sometimes, especially with the automated nature of debt management processes,
Mm-hmm.
until the person in debt actually gets to that sort of seeking help, finding support, being able to engage,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not saying that they can't engage earlier. It's just a lot harder to, because of the emotions that are going on. But the
Mm-hmm.
process is going to continue regardless. And of course, what it does is it sort of creates this self-perpetuating cycle of introducing new changes before the first one has been fully sort of explored.
Yeah.
You we see this even on like a monthly cycle. So if somebody is going through the denial, fear, shame stage and is not ready to engage at this moment in time,
Mm-hmm.
and then a month later we say, right, now we're going to be sending you we're going to, I don't know, apply to the court for a summons,
Yeah.
and then we're putting a charging order on your house. That's 3 lots of change. They've never got to stage 4 or 5 in the change curve because we've kept escalating.
Yeah.
So yes, it requires people to engage so that we can understand that situation. You know, that's really important. But also, you know, we do an awful lot with data these days. So we can look at a particular cohort of people and go, actually, do you know what? Those people in those 3 centiles, they have absolutely no chance of repaying us today. But maybe in 6 months, their position might have changed.
Yeah.
But if we subject them to exactly the same thing of demand and then court order and then charging order, they're not going to talk to us in 6 months because we did loads of scary things to them, and they're probably still reeling from the thing of having that sort of 3 monthly cycle.
Yeah.
And this applies in, I mean, so I guess a couple of things. Let me backtrack a minute. We've done over the years, we've done like what we call delayed contact projects, where actually if you leave a fresh account for sort of like 7 days before you do anything with it, before you even send a letter out, around about 40% of those will clear because people were just late with their payment, or were waiting for payday to clear because it came a couple of days later this month.
Yeah.
You know, and that sort of thing. And so one, you save yourself a shed load of costs by not sending letters to all those accounts. But 2, the person's like, well, fine, you know, that was good. I got it sorted before anything happened.
Yeah.
And then there's, when you look at, like, I mean, certain debts like council tax, for example, if you don't pay, you get the reminder 7 days later, and then the court summons can be issued 7 days after that. Well, for a lot of people, they won't even have had their next payday by that stage. They're reeling from, you know, they probably knew that they couldn't pay on week 1. On week 2, they're reeling from the fact they got the reminder, and then on week 3, they're reeling from the fact that they're now going to court and they haven't even had another payday yet.
Yeah.
So, you know, and don't get me wrong, I know there are a number of local authorities out there because the regulations around council tax collection are what's called permissive. They're not mandatory. So it's local authorities, councils are entitled to use those things, but they don't have to.
Yeah.
And so I know of a number of local authorities who actually do wait 30 days until the reminder goes out.
Yeah.
And don't escalate to the next stage. But yeah, so I think in that cycle, you know, we have to be, again, as an industry, we have to be aware of the impact of our actions. And actually, if we move too fast and too harsh, we are likely to keep pushing people back into the denial, fear, shame, anger sort of area.
Yeah.
Rather than helping them to progress to the point where they can actually engage with the debt in a meaningful way. Sorry, that was a right ramble.
I loved it. No, it's really, really interesting. I think as well, mental health is such a big thing, especially on this podcast. We've talked about it quite a lot. And not only are people who already suffer with mental health more likely to get into debt, but it's also the other way of debt can have such a detrimental effect on people's mental health. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. I know you've kind of already touched on it, but just kind of like, obviously you've got the emotional cycle. And like I said, the ideal goal is to kind of get to the acceptance point and then figure out where you go from there. But that's not always the case for some people. So I was wondering if you could touch a little bit on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, yeah, we do quite often talk about debt-related mental health and mental health-related debt.
Yeah.
You know, debt can be a cause and a symptom, and mental health can be a cause and a symptom. They are very much entwined. You know, and I think some of that mental health issue does arise from the fact that you touched on it at the beginning. You know, us Brits, you know, stiff upper lip. We don't talk about money. That's a dirty subject.
Yeah.
And in fact, there was a YouGov poll a few years ago that showed that I think it was 40% of people were happy to talk to you know, a friend about their mental health, but only 20% of people will talk about finances and debt.
Wow.
Twice as many people will tell you they're depressed as in debt.
Wow.
That you know that
Wow.
don't it's quite, you know, and I look at it today, you know, I've got a mate who's a millennial. And when I say millennial, I mean he's nearly 40 now. You know, I millennials were kids. And so I've got this mate who's a millennial, and he comes in the pub on a Friday night, and you go to him, "Hello, mate, how are you?" He's like, "Yeah, all right, but my mental health hasn't been that great this week." We wouldn't have had that conversation 20 years ago. You know, it
Mm.
would not have happened.
Yeah.
Nowhere. And the thing is, we've had a sustained campaign of shining a light on mental health and making it okay to talk about it. And for me, that's exactly what we need to do with debt.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
need a sustained campaign. You know, I did a little short video a while back, and at the time, it was like 8 in 10 people were in some form of problem debt.
Mm.
Um, yeah, it was at the height of the cost of living crisis. I think it's dropped down a little now, but sorry, that's completely the wrong statistic. So it was
Really?
1 in 8 people are in problem debt.
Wow. Okay. Even
So,
still, that's crazy.
yeah, absolutely. And what I said was, you know, that means if and you'll notice I use a lot of pub analogies, but if you go into the pub on a Friday night and there's 80 people in there, 10 of them are in the same position as you.
Yeah.
You know, and when you start overlaying these statistics on your workforce, so you know, if you work in a big office, or you know, on a bit of building site or whatever it might be, go in and just have a look at how many people are there, you know, and if there's 40 people there, then 5 of them are likely to be in problem debt.
Yeah.
You know, and so that feeling of being alone is one that we create by not talking about debt openly.
Yeah.
And of course, the feeling of being alone is what makes people point the finger at themselves, because they think they're the only ones.
Mm.
And when they start thinking that, then guilt and shame take hold, and it becomes, again, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. People get into that spiral. It's like crossing. This is a really bad analogy, but I've started, so I'll finish. I was going to say it's like crossing the inescapable event horizon of a black hole.
Yeah.
And the reason it's a terrible analogy is because there's always a way back from problem debt.
Yeah.
But at some point, people will have crossed into that spiral, that downward spiral, both emotional and financial.
Mm-hmm.
And they need at some point to reach out and get the help. They need to grab hold of that lifeline to get themselves out of it.
Yeah.
There are lots of lifelines out there. You know, there really are. And all the time that we've got people in the shock, denial, anger phase,
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard for them to even see the lifeline, let alone trust people enough to take it. So,
Yeah.
you know, the mental health thing, and this isn't just like us in the debt industry talking about it. You know, the Royal Colleges of Psychiatrists have published a number of studies on this. We have these days, you know, mental health and debt talking therapies for mental health in the UK NHS actually has referral points, signposting points out to free debt advice. GPs, we've got the debt and mental health evidence form that the Money Advice Trust, amongst others, was instrumental in setting up. You know, it's well known to the point where it's now embedded within our National Health Service at GP surgeries and at mental health talking therapies, that
Yeah.
we signpost debt advice, because we know that you know, it's, I think it's people who have a mental health issue, if they're also in debt, are 50% less likely to recover from the mental health problem, because
Yeah.
the debt exists.
Mm-hmm.
And those things, you know, they feed off each other. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I answered your question there. Again, I went off on a bit of a bit of a Steve, what's going on in Steve's head, rather than maybe
Don't
a
worry.
good answer.
It was the best tangent ever. I know. I absolutely love it. I think we often talk to people, and again, like just kind of bringing it back to IE Hub, and they'll say, you know, I didn't want to talk to credit because I feel like I have to kind of explain myself. I have that shame, I have embarrassment. And I spoke to a customer, I think about a year ago now, but it'll always stick in my head. And she was like, I had this amazing job. I was on like 50 grand a year. And then, you know, I had I lost a family member, and then I had to take time off work, and etc. And her life kind of just spiraled, and then to the point where she had to just kind of claim benefits, but she had like 3 kids, and her life completely changed in the space of like a few months. And she was like, I don't want to call these people now, I'm falling behind on payments, and them look at me in a certain way when like I didn't feel like I deserved to be in that place. Not that anyone does. So I completely agree with that, where it's like some people have so much shame, and then it results in mental health issues because they just don't want to talk about it, and they think they're so alone in it, and they're just not. So many people are.
Yeah. And I think there's also the thing, it's really important, given that it's your podcast isn't just aimed at the industry, it's aimed at the public as well. Is the fact that we don't always get it right. And you are absolutely entitled to call us out. So I'll never forget a story. I was told by an industry colleague, and it was about a free debt advice agency, and they've sort of changed things now, but I think this will resonate with you, given that income and expenditure is core to what you do. But a lady rang up for debt advice, and they were going through and doing a budget with her, and she worked on variable hours, gig economy. And they asked her what her annual income was. And of course, that's fine if you say like the lady you just said is on 50 grand a year.
Yeah.
But when you're on a variable income, maybe a 0 hours contract, and you're getting different amounts coming in, you've probably never actually, you might not even have done a year yet. So how do you know what your annual income is? But because it felt like such a simple question, she was so ashamed that she couldn't answer it that she hung up and didn't ring back until 3 years later, when she was £30,000 in debt.
Wow.
So we aren't always absolutely right on this stuff. We are human and we are fallible, and we don't always get things right. But if something like that ever happens, it's she's gone down in that cycle.
Yeah.
And actually being able to come back, it took us so long to work up the courage to have another second run at it. And by that time, she was in so much worse of a position.
Yeah.
And so if we get it wrong, call us out, tell us, just say to us, do you know what that just made me feel? Even if you have to hang up and then do it by email or through the app or whatever it might be, just say tell us where we get it wrong, because we're human too, right?
Yeah. Oh my God, give me goosebumps. That's crazy to even think. I think, again, on a bit of a tangent, but when I did psychology at university, I did forensic psychology of a master's, and we looked at police interviews, and so much of that was about the questions, and like changing one word in one question can have completely different outcome of the person that you're interviewing in police settings. And when you're just talking, then that's immediately what I thought. It's like the questions and the way people speak to you on the phone can have just the craziest outcome. So yeah, wow, definitely food for thought. Definitely.
And there are really good studies in the debt space on this. So Ofgem, the regulator for the energy sector, published a report back in, I think it was 2021 now, and it had some really natty title like improving bad debt communications using behavioural science evidence, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But they found in it that if you said to people you haven't paid, you got a pretty standard, not great response. If you said to them, we know that sometimes circumstances beyond your control lead to you not having been able to pay us, you got an uptick.
Yeah.
But if you've linked it to a specific event and said, we understand that a lot of people who are experiencing hardship through the cost of living crisis at the moment may be in a position where they're unable to pay their bill in full, then you got another uptick. And it is just building on, these are emotional triggers. This is what YouTube is based off, right? This is what thumbnails and titles on YouTube are all about. It's the emotional trigger to get the click. This is what media headlines and sensational headlines are based on. Why? Because it works. We only have a limited number of responses as human beings to any given situation. We all like to think we're unique. Well, actually, we're probably just as unique as everybody else.
Yeah.
We probably fit in a smaller number of groups than we actually think we do.
Yeah.
And you know, the marketers, and especially with machine learning these days, they've worked that out. And so it's about time that we did that a little bit better in the debt industry, because if we can get that initial conversation, if we can get people to ring in or write in or app in, and you know, get something going, get a conversation going, get a solution going, then we can get them out of debt faster.
Yeah, and hopefully things like this, like podcasts and social media and things like that, will help put it in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Fingers crossed. So just before we wrap up, I wonder if you could kind of talk a little bit about some coping strategies. So I know we've mentioned kind of specifics going through, but if there's anything else you wanted to mention, just in terms of someone's listening to this, they're really stressed, they're in debt, they kind of don't know what to do, like what would your advice be to them?
So I'd always answer this in the same way. Get free government-backed debt advice as your number one port of call.
Yeah.
We call them debt advice agencies, but actually their purpose is to find you the most appropriate debt solution.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a debt solution could be a repayment plan that's affordable for you. Nobody in financial services or the debt advice industry is allowed to set up an unaffordable repayment plan.
Mm-hmm.
And it may sound obvious, but we don't do that anymore because people don't pay them, and then we end up doing the work twice or three times if we're lucky, because people then disappear. So they will maybe set up an affordable repayment plan. It could be that a debt relief order is the right thing for you. So, you know, with a debt relief order, then after a period of a year, if your circumstances haven't changed, then the majority of your debt can be written off, but you have to be keeping up current liabilities. IVAs, independent voluntary arrangements, get quite a lot of bad press, but actually it was the mis-selling of them that was the problem. As a product, they do suit a certain cohort of people. For some people, you know, my neighbour, my neighbour is, he comes from a travelling community, works all the hours that God sends, and is £90,000 in debt from having had machines stolen when they weren't insured and things like this. He's never going to repay that. He needs to be made bankrupt, because that's the only thing that will stop the enforcement agents coming round the house. And even the enforcement agents are now talking to them about, well, maybe we can talk to the creditors to get them to make you bankrupt so that you don't have to pay the amount yourself. So it's I guess what I'm saying is, there isn't one solution that fits everybody, but there are lots of solutions out there. And a qualified free debt advice agency, never pay for debt advice, a free quality debt advice agency that's backed by the government, it's on the Money Helper website, will help you to do that. Doing nothing never resolves the debt situation. I said earlier, that automated process will keep on escalating things. And the other thing on this is, debt advisors deal with hundreds of people just like you every year. Nothing you say can shock them. It's a bit like going to the doctor for that kind of embarrassing health issue. They've seen it all before, and they know exactly what to do to help you. So just if you can deal with one creditor and you've only got one, pick up the phone to them. And if you don't get the outcome that you needed, then go to a debt advice agency. If you've got multiple creditors and you're just struggling to deal with it, debt advice every single time, and make that budget. Yeah,
make the budget. I love that. Thank you very much, Steven. Is there anything else that you wanted to discuss or mention before we wrap up?
No, I think we've covered everything. I just want to say thank you for having me on. I could sit and talk about this for days at a time.
Yeah, me too. Honestly, we'll get you back at some point because that was absolutely amazing. Thank you very much.
Lovely.
And thank you very much to all of our listeners. If you do want to reach out, I'll drop your LinkedIn below, any socials that you want, any links, I'll obviously include them in the description. But thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and we'll be back next week. Goodbye.